Earlier this year, Turo competitor Avail closed down all of their locations. And just this month, another Turo competitor, though a much lesser known one, also called it quits. And so a question, of course, has to be asked. If all of these Turo competitors are struggling or dying, is Turo next? So let's talk about it. Avail was a company that was competing directly with Turo, and though they had a slightly different approach, Avail marketed themselves as a solution for people who wanted to make extra money while they traveled. The entire idea was that you could park your car at the Avail designated parking lot at an airport, leave your car with Avail, and they would rent your car out while you were gone. This in turn would mean that you wouldn't have to pay for those expensive airport parking fees. You would be able to make extra income while you traveled, and upon your return, your car would be waiting there for you freshly washed. But earlier this year, Avail closed most of their locations, and currently they're only operating out of Chicago and Denver. And even more recently, another Turo competitor, Fetch, also closed their doors, which is really unfortunate because Fetch was a company that I liked quite a lot. Fetch was a company I had actually talked about on my channel in the past. They specialized in peer-to-peer car sharing for trucks, so things like cargo vans, box vans, or trucks. And earlier this month, Fetch quietly closed their doors after 7 years of operation. And while neither Fetch or Avail have publicly acknowledged why they closed their doors, we have to wonder why these companies are failing or why others like HireCar and GetAround are struggling. And truthfully, I think it's a natural question to wonder if Turo is going to be next. And so in this video, I want to break down why I actually don't think that this is the case and why I think that we are seeing these companies that compete directly with Turo really struggle in the car sharing space altogether. So let's get started. Every few months, I get an email or a DM from somebody asking me if I would be interested in testing out their new peer-to-peer car sharing platform that they're launching or they're testing. Basically, the idea is that there are a group of people that are unhappy with some of the more mainstream car sharing platforms, and they want to have a try at building their own, one that's better, more host-centric. And while I do love the enthusiasm that comes along with car sharing, and I am always 100% in support of people going in and making an industry or business model better, I ultimately think that these Turo competitors are very, very hard to create. I think that Turo as a car sharing platform is one that's very difficult to compete with. And there are ultimately many reasons as to why. And to really dive into why this is the case, we have to look at the question of why do car sharing platforms fail? And the first reason, in my opinion, is market share. Now, I am making this video from not only the perspective of somebody who's deeply intertwined in the world of Turo and car sharing, but also from the perspective of somebody who's been working in small business consulting for the last nearly a decade. And I can't stress the importance of first to market when it comes to any successful business model. And for those of you who don't know what first to market is, it's basically the idea that you were the first one to do something, or you were the first one to bring that product, service, food item, whatever the case is, mainstream. For example, a perfect example of this is McDonald's. They were the first to market in their niche, and they're still dominating to this day. But first to market applies to every single industry. It's why the fast food restaurant Zaxby's is having trouble expanding into the Texas market because Chick-fil-A was here first. It's why Tesla has such a strong leap in front of Ford, General Motors, and basically any other electric vehicle manufacturer. Amazon, Uber, Coke, these are all brands that while they may not have technically been the very first one in their space, they were the first ones to go to a mass market appeal, and thus they are still dominating to this day. And as a result, when you think of soda, you think of Coke. And when you think of online shopping, you probably think of Amazon. Turo was the first mainstream car sharing platform to enter the car sharing space. In fact, I would argue that they made car sharing what it is today. They have the largest guest base, and thus they have the largest host base. When it comes to car sharing platforms, at least here in the United States, they are just a ways ahead of any other competitor. And because of this, Turo is probably going to have a stronghold on the car sharing market for an extremely long period of time unless something extremely substantial happens. And an example of what that could be, truthfully, I don't even know. Hosts are already on Turo, guests are already signed up, and people have kind of developed a routine. And at this point, it's going to be very difficult to convince hosts to leave Turo for another platform, even if that other platform has some great benefit. Truthfully, at this point, being as though I have 27 cars, I don't know what somebody would have to offer me in order to get me to take my cars off of Turo and put them onto a different platform. The fact is, Turo has been developing their market share in the car sharing space for the last decade, and it's going to be very difficult for a company, big or small, to come in and steal that market share from Turo. So that is issue number one. First to market, or alternatively first to mainstream market. But a second issue that a lot of newer car sharing platforms are having, in fact, I would argue that this is a problem with every single car sharing platform out there except for Turo, is the host onboarding versus guest onboarding and making sure that there is the right amount of host to guest ratio. This is actually a complaint that I had with GetAround whenever I was hosting on the GetAround platform, and it was something that I became increasingly frustrated with. It's kind of like the argument of what comes first, the chicken or the egg. Whenever there's a car sharing platform that's growing, there has to have the question be asked of who do we want to recruit first, the host or the guest, and which one should there be more of? You need enough hosts to support the guests, but you also need enough guests to make the time of the host worthwhile. And obviously the task of having the right host to guest ratio is an incredibly complex issue that I'm not even going to begin to pretend like I understand how to solve it. But I will say that this was absolutely my biggest complaint of GetAround whenever I was hosting on that platform. When I was on GetAround, I was getting incredibly frustrated with the fact that they were running new host onboarding promotions month after month, while my cars were sitting day after day because the demand for guests just simply wasn't high enough in my market. And I felt like at the time, instead of GetAround allocating marketing money towards getting more hosts, they should instead spend that money on getting more guests. And I was really frustrated that they weren't doing that, and I was absolutely feeling it as a host. But the truth is, as frustrated as I was with GetAround, I definitely acknowledge that this is an incredibly complex issue, and I think it's one that's going to plague any type of car sharing platform that wants to get into this business and compete with Turo. Making sure that you have the right balance of host to guest is something that is incredibly difficult, and if you don't shred this balance lightly, it can in turn lead to a platform failing. And while I don't know if this is the reason why either Avail or Fetch failed, I wouldn't be surprised if it was a contributing factor. But truthfully, I don't believe that either one of these problems is the main reasons as to why car sharing platforms fail, or the reason why I think newer platforms are doomed to fail. I think hands down the biggest reason for this is claims and payouts. This is, in my opinion, hands down the largest reason why car sharing platforms have a really hard time competing with Turo, because paying claims, whether it's a damage claim, a cleaning fee, a smoking fee, a toll claim, regardless of how big or small the claim is, paying these out to your host is incredibly expensive. The thing about a platform like Turo, and where I see so much benefit with Turo, is the fact that if you are a host on this platform and if you follow the terms of service to a T, you will get paid out for all of your claims regardless of if the guest pays for it. So for example, if you submit a $100 toll charge to your guest because of the tolls that they accumulated during their trip, you can submit that reimbursement, and within about 3 days, you'll be reimbursed for that $100. It doesn't even matter if the guest has actually paid that yet. Theoretically, the guest could get your invoice, they could in turn cancel their debit card, close down their Turo account, and never ever use the platform again, thus never paying that $100 toll fee, and Turo would be out $100 and you would still be reimbursed. This applies to every single type of claim within your Turo business, which of course can vary from a few dollars to tens of thousands of dollars. This is a huge bonus of being part of a car sharing platform like Turo, but it's also a huge cost center for Turo themselves. Turo just recently became a profitable company. And by profitable, I mean that they've had a few profitable quarters. They are still in the red overall. And over the years, Turo has made obvious and massive moves to limit this exposure. For example, back whenever I started Turo, there was no deductible on damage claims. So if you had your car in an accident, no matter how big or small, you would be reimbursed 100% for that damage. There was no deductible that was applied. There also used to be a $50 per hour late fee up to 4 hours. So for example, if somebody was 4 hours late returning your car, you would be able to get paid out $200 for the late return. Obviously, this isn't the case anymore. The smoking claim, while it did used to be $150 before it was moved up to $250, did used to be a lot more lax. You used to be able to just report the smell of smoke and you didn't actually have to present evidence of ash. And the mileage policy was crazy. You could charge up to $3 per mile over the allotted mileage, and there was no limits to how much you could do based off of your year, make, or model of vehicle. So you had these hosts that were running these really cheap beater cars on Turo, and whenever a guest went over mileage on these vehicles, they would be charged $3 per mile on that car. that could end up being hundreds of dollars, which had a massive impact on Turo overall. And in the early days of Turo, there wasn't even a cap to the amount that you could charge in reimbursements, and whenever this policy was abused over the years, they ended up limiting the amount that you could request and also applying caps to it as well. These fees were absolutely crazy, and Turo has had to adjust their business model over the years in order to stay afloat and become profitable. These claim benefits and safety nets that Turo offers through guaranteeing that you're going to be paid out regardless of whether or not the guest actually pays for that claim is, in my opinion, the biggest benefit to being a part of Turo. But it's also one of the biggest costs for Turo as a platform. So unless you're starting a platform and you have venture capital funding or you have a ton of different resources, I just don't see how a smaller platform can stay afloat while offering these same competitive benefits. And I personally don't see the point of using a car sharing platform if these claims benefits aren't offered. And I would bet that over the years, as car sharing companies have come and gone, one of the biggest reasons as to why these companies disappear really does come down to the claims payouts, and it just ends up being significantly more expensive than these platforms anticipate. These three reasons are, in my opinion, the three biggest reasons as to why companies outside of Turo tend to struggle. And ultimately, the reason why I don't think Turo is going to share the same fate of these different companies is because they have found their nice balance between these three different factors. They were the first to market and currently have the largest market share. They've reached a nice equilibrium between host to guest ratio, and they've found their footing whenever it comes to paying for claims and limiting their exposure. And these same three reasons as to why Turo has found success is ultimately why smaller players are really struggling to take market share from Turo. So truthfully, if I was a car sharing host who was getting tired of Turo and I was disappointed with the closure of Fetch and Avail, I would probably not look to start a competing car sharing platform, but I would instead probably look to just do direct rentals. Direct rentals is whenever you rent directly to your guest rather than using Turo as a third party. And instead of using Turo as the platform that facilitates it, you would do marketing on platforms like Facebook, Google Ads, things like that. Now, this is something that I have never done, and I'm not personally interested in it because I find value in the support that Turo offers through their claims, customer support, roadside assistance, marketing, things like that. So for me, and I think for a lot of people, the pros of going direct simply do not outweigh the cons. But if you're somebody who is wanting to look for a different path, this could be a viable option. But I do think that if the closure of Avail and Fetch tells us anything, it tells us that getting into the car sharing industry is something that's probably easier said than done. I think the next interesting thing that we'll learn in the next couple of months is how Uber rideshare ends up faring. That is something that I will be looking at closely, and I'm really interested to see how they compete with Turo long term, because I think if there is any platform that can compete, it would be Uber. But like always, you guys, I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, comments, if you have anything to add, I would love to hear it, so make sure to leave a comment down below. And while you guys are at it, make sure to hit the like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit the notification bell, and I will see you guys in my next video.